So Westworld Season 3, Episode 3, titled The Absence of Field, was yet another remarkable episode, allowing us to revisit the storylines of Episode 1, which saw the characters of Caleb being set up, and Dolores' efforts in the real world to springboard her revolution into taking down the system and Rehoboam, and also the infiltration by Charlotte Hale into Delos. And I'm sure we can all remember how that episode ended with Caleb finally meeting Dolores, and as much as I loved the last episode with bringing back Maeve and learning a lot of where she is currently at in the story, this is the episode and plot that I've been anticipating on revisiting again. So as always everyone, if you're brand new to the channel, I will be covering Westworld all season long as we recap each episode, break down the details, and even dive into a bit of theory crafting about where things could be heading based off of any new little tidbits that we get from some episodes. And from what we explored in episode 3 or what we learned, there's quite a bit to talk about. So in episode 1 we were introduced properly to the outside world, and we're no longer in Westworld, and we learned through Dolores getting close to Liam Dempsey, whose father was one of the original architects of Rehoboam, that this system practically governs everyone's lives as much as the host's narratives inside the parks are set out for them. And in this episode, while I would like to say that it has a few things going on, you know, following Caleb and Dolores and also Charlotte Hale, or at least the pretend Charlotte Hale, it really is at the same time about exploring the power that Rehoboam has and beginning to crack into the meat of what this season's goal is really about. Now this episode picks up with that brief version of a recording of the real Charlotte Hale recording a video message for her son Nathan during the massacre that took place in Westworld. Now this is explored quite a bit further down the road, and we get to see a full video of this later on, and it's even quite integral to the inner conflict that the host Charlotte Hale is having during this episode. But then we're actually taken to a moment before the ending of Westworld Season 2. Before that scene, if you guys remember, where we saw Dolores waking up Bernard and where she set him free to kind of be her counterbalance, or at least as Bernard put it last episode, a check on herself just in case she goes too far with her plan. And we see Dolores awaken whichever host unit has been put into this copy of Charlotte Hale, of which this episode still doesn't reveal, or the audience doesn't get any confirmation as to who it is. And the theories so far have been that Dolores' father, or even Teddy, despite him going to the Valley Beyond, some think it could be somewhat a copy of his code, or even other hosts such as Clementine. But throughout this episode, we were given quite a few clues from Dolores, such as how she knows this host control unit inside the Charlotte Hale better than anyone, and also this copy Charlotte knows more about Dolores than anyone else, which is quite a bit of a hint, as there were only a couple of other hosts who were, you know, that close to Dolores from what we've seen in prior seasons. Or you could go as far as saying that this Charlotte Hale copy could be the Wyatt side of Dolores, in which later on in the episode we're given yet another clue as to when Charlotte Hale is strangling that man who was trying to get close to Charlotte Hale's son Nathan, and that as she was strangling him it was reminding herself of who she really is. And if there was ever one thing that we knew about Wyatt in Westworld from prior seasons, that it was quite a much darker, unforgiving and more violent side of Dolores. But when it comes to that moment in terms of violence reminded to this clone Charlotte of who she was, I don't feel as though that really applies to too much of the other characters, such as maybe even Abernathy. But then again, he even had a previous narrative that wasn't being Dolores' father, and I believe that was in the role of this villainous narrative in where he was the leader of a cannibalistic cult. But I don't think it would be that narrative either. But knowing Westworld, guys, they could bring in some context that we never expected that makes a whole bunch of things clear. So while I'll revisit Charlotte Hale throughout this breakdown, I would still love to hear your thoughts on who you think this clone Charlotte Hale could be down in the comments. So after explaining to Charlotte that they have to control Delos in order for their kind to kind of prosper down the line, and how she trusts this clone Charlotte to do that, we then revisit that moment with Caleb in where he was looking after a wounded Dolores. Now if you guys saw the promo trailer for this episode, we already knew that she was going to be getting in an ambulance, and it was quite funny watching how confused the paramedics were at her medical readings. All at the same time I was just watching how Aaron Paul's Caleb was reacting to what was going on, within this moment of the episode he kind of had no idea what he had gotten himself into. I also want to quickly mention, guys, and this should go without saying anyway, whether you're a fan or not of his previous work, that Aaron Paul is a phenomenal actor, but I'm just so happy that he's in this show, and even more so that he's in in this particular role, and where he is going to be that kind of like beacon of humanity that should always hopefully remind Dolores that humans aren't all these insects to be, I guess, squashed. And in this episode, we got that, with her even going on to call him a good guy after those cops who were doing a shady cleanup job that was listed on that Rico crime app to kill Dolores. And so this relationship between them both really is going along the way I was kind of predicting. I mean, only in the sense of what their relationship seems to be becoming in this, episode, and how it gets clarified even further down the line towards the end. And I can't wait to see what that brings out between both characters in the future episodes to come. But let's go back to Charlotte Hale for a bit, as this episode went back and forth between the different arcs that were in play between the characters. And Charlotte, of course, had to play her part at Delos, and this is where we got introduced to the riot control robots, of which there were around 300, I believe they said were made. And if any of you remember from the Westworld Season 3 main trailers that showcased a chunk of the season, that they will come in handy somewhere down the line. But it was at this moment that Charlotte learned from a Delos shareholder breakdown that a Delos investor has been buying out shares of the company sneakily for quite some time, and that they have effectively been brought out and can no longer go private, as this person has 38% of the shares. Now eventually she's informed from Irene that it's a man named Ungaran Serac who's behind the takeover at Delos, and that he's actually invisible in terms of like no record, databases, I mean all of that has been scrubbed. And this actually comes into a little wacky theory of mine later on, so definitely stay tuned for that as to why Serac has kind of no history, even though you could argue he's powerful enough to do that. All they knew at this time is that he first initiated a data transaction with Delos going back as far as 2 decades ago. Yet again, another key thing to the theory. And of course, we all know from last episode who Serac is, who was first teased by Liam Dempsey's handler in episode 1 named Connells, and in last episode who of course Maeve met and set off in a task to find and kill Dolores. But before we go down the Serac story of this episode, which comes in even harder a bit later, and how my theory and everything ties into that, there was also of course another side to Charlotte Hale's story that they were displaying in this episode, and that is whoever the control host unit is inside this copy body of Charlotte's seems to be falling apart. I mean, even depressed to a point, and has been getting to the point of hurting herself, as well as forgetting who she is in terms of the original host's self. Now, her personal life has been all over the place, considering that whichever host is within Charlotte isn't the real Charlotte herself. So, she can keep up appearances at Delos, but those who know her best, such as her ex or, her son Nathan, know that something is off. I mean, with her son even going on to say that I want the old mummy back when she couldn't even tuck him into bed properly, of which is kind of revealed later in that recording in the episode that she used to sing to him a song when he was going to sleep, which this clone Charlotte failed to do. And I just like how this was shown through her meeting with Dolores, where it seemed that this clone Hale was almost at her breaking point. Dolores was even saying that you're talking like one of them, they don't have impulse control, we do, with Dolores of course talking about humans. So this just adds more into how whichever host this is seems as if he or she is losing control to the Charlotte Hale personality coming back to life in a way. And this is actually even demonstrated further towards the end of the episode with that recording, I've already mentioned a few times, of where when the full recording gets played, we see the clone Charlotte Hale crying in her office. At this point too, Charlotte learns that some of the host control units are missing from Delos, one being Maeve, of which of course we found out last episode where she was being kept. Now the Delos workers had revealed to Charlotte that whoever took Maeve had admin access to the park from the top of the food chain, and she informs Dolores of Serac, and this is where they're gonna learn that the person they're looking for is looking for them. Now due to all of this, it's kind of more clear that there's a mole at Delos, and Charlotte is kind of concerned that this mole will find her, but it becomes clear by the end of the episode that Charlotte was in fact the mole this whole time, and those messages on her phone had been some form of communication from Serac, which yet again kind of comes into the theory with the noises that these messages made. Now let's briefly talk about that theory I keep mentioning. Now this may be crazy, but when the car gets rerouted to meet Serac, it does make me wonder if Serac, providing that Charlotte Hale was given these glasses to see a holographic version of him, what I'm wondering is he even real at all, and that he could be a manifestation of Rehoboam itself. Now, of course, Serac could have just not wanted to be there in person, and, he could just, be appearing in that hologram form, and that's why she had to wear the glasses. But it does make me wonder if when we saw Serac last episode with Maeve, if he was even real there as well, or just some kind of hosty kind of version of himself, as I believe Maeve was touching his shoulders or something at one point. And also, everyone, when Rehoboam was first made, of which we learned from Liam Dempsey in the first episode, was around 20 years ago, in which we learned in this episode that Serac first made that data transaction. So I'm just thinking, what if all of this is Rehoboam, of which we all know by now is the real villain of this season, and with what we learned from Serac here at this point when he was revealing to the audience that Charlotte and him have had this arrangement this whole time during the events of Westworld to give Serac what she had promised him, of which was the profile for every single one of their guests at the Delos parks. So maybe I'm sounding crazy here, and maybe, this is just as simple as, he was one of the original architects for Rehoboam, so of course that's why it matches up with the 2 decades ago thing and everything like that. But it just makes me think with the other little clues, like the voice messages being this kind of electronical communication, and the other little tidbits that line up, and how he wants the data on the guests at the park. Maybe that's Rehoboam wanting the data to kind of be added to Rehoboam's collection of ever-growing knowledge. By the way, I do acknowledge that this could be quite an unlikely theory, and Serac is real, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that theory down in the comments below. But continuing on, it's revealed that the assets are still out there from the Delos parks and all the profiles that were gathered, and Serac knows that the key is within Dolores, which just kind of adds more to the hit that he wants Maeve to carry out, of which we know comes to a face-to-face at some point in this season thanks to the trailers. But lastly, everyone, revisiting the Caleb and Dolores story, I just do love how this all unfolded, with him heading to the hospital of where his mother is, in which he learns from the Rico crime app that he is now a high-value target in his area, and how it's a seasoned secure job. Now, these men who took the job find Caleb and want to know more about Dolores, as acquiring her is worth a fortune on the app, and this leads to Dolores finding out that he's been taken thanks to the replacement host of Connell's, if you guys remember, whose mission in the meantime is just to get closer to Liam Dempsey, which I'm also looking forward to seeing more of that host play that kind of double agent role. And if you guys remember as well, we still don't know which host control unit went into Connell's either. So yeah, we're going to have to speculate about that one at some point. And this is where Dolores rescues Caleb. But when he was being interrogated by those men, they mentioned that he turned off his military grade drip, in which they also turned back on to rig his heart rate to go to like 200 beats per minute. Now, this is somewhat off topic, but I thought I'd mention it while I remember. In the trailer for this season, when the man in black is having those drills inserted into his mouth in like a nightmare dentist scenario, it looks like this could have something to do with his drip also. So has anyone got any theories out there as to what could be going on with the man in black? But I suppose, that could wait until we see him. Now, this is where we learn a lot from Dolores, who knows, of course, a lot about Caleb thanks to Rehoboam, and how he got abandoned by his mother when he was 8, and she never returned and was even institutionalized 6 months later from that moment. Now, even though Caleb is initially enraged, all of this was just this breakdown of the importance of the revolution and main plot of this season, and how it's about insight and the system that it's built on. Dolores even goes on to explain how the founders fed it everyone's raw data long before there were even any privacy laws in the world for this kind of thing. From every purchase, job search, doctor visit, romantic choice, call, text, every aspect of people's lives were recorded and logged in order to create a mirror world of this world, a composite of everyone, and how it even dictates who it lets people become as a result. Now, this is ultimately what sways Caleb to sign over his future to kind of helping Dolores, because he learns that when they're at the pier, that this is where he will end his life, because the system runs a predictive algorithm, and given his history of depression, his mother's mental illness, and proficiency with firearms and fondness of the ocean, that the most likely outcome was that he would take his life here in the next 10 years. And this is where we kind of saw this version of Caleb with his hair kind of shaved, sitting on the edge by the ocean. Now, some are theorizing that this could be in the past, or just a version of his future, I suppose. But at the same time, when I first saw it, I just took it as those were just scenes of him going to the pier contemplating ending his life, but he never went through with it. But at the same time, with the whole world within a world or simulation theory and things like that, I understand how people could be reading into how those scenes of Caleb sitting on the edge of the pier could be something else entirely different. So yeah, again guys, that's another thing to think about. And you even see on the tablet that Rehoboam has this classified assessment that includes marriage not recommended, it enforces that children are not approved, and how he's restricted to manual and physical work and no social interaction at a job, which links back to that first episode, if you guys remember, where he got turned down when he applied for that job, and how there was no real reason as to why he couldn't qualify for it. But yet again, these scenes, it just highlights what I'm liking most about this season, among everything else of course. I just really enjoy the premise of the outside world. But Dolores seems different here when she's with Caleb. I mean, as she said to him, he surprised her and finds him unpredictable. Most wouldn't have helped in his situation, and he says that she's the first real thing that has happened to him in a long time, which is kind of somewhat ironic, but I still think he'll be totally on board when he finds out that she is a host. But if he was going to die anyway, in his own words, at least this way, he gets to decide who he wants to be. So I know I said this at the end of my last breakdown, but things are just going to get rolling even more from this moment onwards. So all in all guys, I thought this was a fantastic episode. I would love to know what you thought of my thoughts with the theories behind Charlotte Hale's host, even the theory behind Rehoboam. I mean, that could be a bit far-fetched, but honestly, when it comes to Westworld, you never know. But if you enjoyed this video guys, I would really appreciate a like on it. Subscribe for more Westworld breakdowns and recaps and reviews just like this. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you hosts in the next video. Goodbye.